Hi, my name is Haroon Khalid and I am the co-founder and executive director of Qissa, which is a non-profit storytelling organization.
My name is Anam Zakaria and I'm also the co-founder of Qissa, and I work as a strategic director at the organization.
And we really want to thank you for having us, for giving us this wonderful platform to talk more about Qissa, to talk more about the Qissa festival, and why do we find it so important to run and to organize a literary newcomer refugee literary festival in Toronto, and we'll speak more about that in just a few minutes. But before we do that, I want to speak about what Qissa is. So Qissa in many South Asian languages actually means story or storytelling. There are, of course, these iconic Qissas like Heer Ranja and Laila Majnu and so on and so forth. So essentially Qissa are this traditional way of kind of storytelling in a South Asian context. There's also a tradition of Qissa in Arabic and so on. Now, what is really important about Qissa though is that it's very rooted in this oral history, oral storytelling, verbal storytelling. So you have this one person who's recalling this iconic story over and over again to different audiences. And what is also really significant about these folklore legends, which then become Qissa, is that even though they are universal stories, the stories get repeated over several generations, but they change based on the political context. So how the story is, so even though they're telling the same story, the story is told the story is a reflection of the multiple contexts, different time period that they are based in. So for example, Waris Shah writing the Qissa of Heer Ranja in 1800 is very much responding to the Punjab of 18th century, whereas the Modar writing the same story, which very much remains the same, in the 16th century is responding to Punjab of 16th century. And so you use the same story but tell it in a different way to kind of then talk about the political, socio-economic context of that time period. And that's a very, very important part of Qissa, which I feel like is also a very important context to then explain what we are doing and why we are doing this. Now, what is also really important around Qissa and story is that it's not just a story, but it's also the act of storytelling. And through the act of storytelling, what you end up doing is that you end up making a community. So Qissa essentially is also a process through which different communities come together, and a community is formed around the very act of storytelling, which once again is a very, very important part of the work that we do and our mission.
And I want to talk a little bit about, give some context as to where we're kind of sitting here today and having this conversation, and also just a really big thank you to the festival and to Sabine and Amrita for having us and letting us kind of share the story of this Qissa and how it came about. We're sitting in Canada right now in Toronto, and we moved as immigrants ourselves in 2019, so it's been about 6-7 years, and Canada has a really predominant kind of larger narrative about immigration and it being a land of immigrants and really welcoming to immigrants, and there's a lot of conversation. It's in the dominant discourse. But as immigrants ourselves, what became obvious very quickly was that there are often, as states do, linear, homogenous narratives of what immigration looks like. And especially in today's context of Canada, where a lot of immigration is happening from the global south, there is an idea or a gaze on where people are coming from, why they're coming to Canada. There's can be a gaze which is very much still Orientalist and rooted in this idea of these poverty-stricken, war-struck places that these people are coming from, and they come to Canada, and once they've arrived, everything is okay. And therefore, it is a story of upward and very linear kind of mobility. And the story kind of ends there. And obviously for immigrants and for newcomers, for refugees in particular, it really doesn't end there. The past, the places we come from are complex, they're layered, they're nuanced. Who Canada lets in is also not a simple story. It's a different immigration system to the UK, to the US. Largely folks who are entering the country statistically are those who are highly skilled, who probably have some level of privilege back in the home country, or have professional careers, because you need all of these points to be able to enter. But once you do, what happens to you after you leave the airport is often not the focus of the story. And having lived through some of that journey ourselves, and then I in particular my first job ended up being in the settlement sector, which essentially are agencies that work with other newcomers and refugees. So that's the work that I was doing. It became very obvious that there are these ways that we have to navigate, and everybody, of course, within refugees, newcomers, immigrants, there's so many differences based on like where you're coming from and your class and your social location. But really, that we are navigating this kind of maze of a world, and it's complex and it's complicated, and it is not always a story of upward mobility, or it may be in some instances, but not in others. And there are these nuances and these lived experiences and these narratives that are not making it to part of this big story. And so that's how Qissa was really born, as this idea of what happens if you start doing oral histories of immigrants, and immigrants tell the stories that they want to tell in their own words, and we do that beyond the white gaze. Right? We do that beyond the Western gaze. We do that beyond the Orientalist gaze. What kind of stories will emerge? What kind of stories become permissible? What kind of stories become sayable? Depending on who is asking that question and the kind of community you create. So that was the initial idea behind Qissa and how it took birth.
So I think what is really important about the work that we do is, actually Anam alluded to that, is our own lived experience of being immigrants. And I feel like that's a very, very important part of the story. So we came to Canada in 2019, and both of us came with a lot of privilege, but also a lot of experience. When I came to Canada, I had 5 published books. I had over 300 articles, and I had taught at multiple schools in Pakistan and had worked in non-profit organizations and so forth. And similarly, Anam also had a great experience, 10 years. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, so around 10 years of non-profit experience. And what's also interesting is that Anam, in fact, had her undergraduate degree from McGill. So we did come to Canada with a lot of experience, but as tends to happen is that as racialized immigrants coming from the global South, there is a certain kind of stereotype about those countries, as Anam mentioned. So there is a looking down upon the experiences from the global South. Now, I didn't have a lot of struggle in my work, but Anam can talk more about some of the challenges that she was having, and I feel like that really informed the way the organization kind of developed. So, for example, I was working with an organization, even though I had to take a step down in my career, but there was this kind of, and that organization that I worked with did work with a lot of newcomers and refugees, and in fact and still to date, one of the most progressive organizations in terms of how it sort of addresses some of the challenges that newcomer and refugee face. But even then, there's a lot of kind of wide gaze through which, and then saviorism through which refugees and newcomers are seen. So the idea was that all of these artists who are coming to Toronto, who are newcomer refugees, despite years of experiences, were emerging. So, for example, one of the mentors that I was working with for this organization had way less experience than I did, and in fact, one of the advice that I received as an artist when I was applying for a particular grant was that my resume looks too impressive, so I have to kind of cut down on some of my experiences and some of my articles to make it more presentable, because that's essentially what immigrants and newcomers, especially racialized immigrants, are seen as. They're not meant to be seen as already accomplished. The accomplishment needs to begin in Canada. So a lot of their previous experience kind of needs to be discarded. You want to talk more about this?
Yeah, and I think this erasure is something that a lot of newcomers and refugees that we've been kind of working with have experienced, and I experienced myself. So, you're coming with decades, sometimes 2 decades of experience, and when you come here, the idea is that even though in order to get here, you probably went through a lot of degree equivalencies and credential equivalencies, and you were kind of told that, whatever you have, whatever experience, education you have is equivalent to the Canadian standard, but there are gaps in policies. And so when you actually start applying for jobs, it's like you have experience, but you don't have Canadian experience. And if you don't have Canadian experience, you don't really have experience. And if you don't have that experience, we cannot recruit you. But if you don't recruit us, we also cannot gain that experience. It's this conundrum that a lot of immigrants kind of run into. And I did myself, I had I'd done my undergrad from here, I came back, I did my grad school from here, and I had a lot of privilege in the sense that I was still working, not in Canada, but elsewhere. And so financially we were doing okay. A lot of people obviously don't have that luxury, and you're applying and you're applying and you're applying for roles, sometimes hundreds and hundreds, and either you don't have enough Canadian experience for the roles that you probably are qualified enough for, or when you start applying and kind of stepping down, and underemployment is a bigger issue in some ways than unemployment here. When you kind of start stepping down, then you are overqualified for those positions, so you can't kind of be recruited for them either. So there are these systemic barriers, and so a lot of times what's happening, depending on how quickly your bank balance kind of starts to drain out, you have to scramble and you have to make choices, and maybe you've come with family and maybe you have kids, and you're hustling and you're trying to make ends meet, and so you take odd jobs, and that process is then glorified and called resilience. Right? There's this idea that, of course, you have to start over, and you have to start from scratch. And in fact, a lot of immigrants also internalize that, right? So this idea that, yes, of course I do, I'm starting from scratch, but not all qualifications are discounted, right? I remember when I was having challenges finding work, and then when I was finally being interviewed for this role and kind of shared my experience, and this was at a settlement agency, so again, an organization that's meant to really support newcomers and refugees. I was told very honestly that, yes, our recruiters ask us if we're okay hiring somebody with an accent. Now, we're not talking about the British or the Australian accent over here. There are particular regions of the world, particular accents, particular kind of experience that gets erased. So when in light of that, when you then kind of glorify and kind of appropriate as a state the resilience that newcomers and immigrants have to go through, that for me was quite problematic. So I was coming to this from, it took me a year and a half of kind of pushing and then finding a job, still underemployed, and then working with other newcomers and refugees. And at that time, something really interesting happened for us. We had our child, and we started taking Uber more than ever, because we had to go to doctor's appointments and so forth. And every time we would sit in an Uber, most of our Uber drivers happened to be from our part of the world, South Asia, sometimes Middle East, Africa, and we would get into conversations, especially with the South Asian drivers, a lot of them Punjabi, and we come from Punjab ourselves. And very quickly you would learn that Uber is just one part of the story, and there were doctors and engineers and doing all kinds of work, and musicians and artists, and came here, and because of the same kind of issues, these systemic barriers, resorted to gig work, and that itself was just very telling. And so one of our first projects actually at Qissa became Driving Canada. We wanted to use Uber as a front seat view of what immigration looks like and what happens to people after they arrive here. How do they make ends meet? How do they navigate the system? How do they kind of lean on sometimes informal systems, because the formal systems are not really working for you? And we sat down with Uber drivers and used Uber really as an entry point into their life, right? So who is the person behind your wheel, right? And how can we humanize them through their oral histories? So what was their childhood like? Why did they want to come to Canada? What was the perception like? How was it kind of advertised? A lot of people talked about the Insta Reels and how we kind of present ourselves on social media and what that image is. And then kind of arriving here with those conceptions, sometimes misconceptions, and then trying to make sense of it after that. So we're sitting with these people, and and we are getting a very different lens into their life, but also into Canada.
By the time I came to Canada, I was working with the Chief Secretary of the state. Chief Secretary of the state is the top level of bureaucracy. I was there working. Salary was good, but not that I can predict something in a short span of time. As you have heard stories from other immigrants, that once they go there, they have a home there, they built everything here, they have cars, you see the reels.
I got an opportunity to work for Microsoft, and I worked for them for 9 years. Me and my wife, we talked again. Do you really think we should be leaving country? We have very high paying professions. Do you really want to take this step to go to a foreign country and establish yourself once again? And then we took a decision that for betterment of our lives and our daughter, we should probably take this step. I thought, what big of a deal would it be to get a customer service job? It's a big country. It's a lot of big companies are there. Every company needs a customer service job.
But yeah, I was super excited about the PR when it came to me. And I was, super energetic that I'll do this, I'll do that. Because now this was the point when I was only earning hand for my family. Getting a job when you have like 8 or 9 years of experience shouldn't be that hard, right? But we would never hear back from.
When we first came, it was, you need the Canadian experience. I don't know what they mean with that. I knew later, but for me it's like experience is experience. That's the only thing they were like, you need Canadian experience. How will I get it basically if I don't get a job?
Once you bank accounts are draining out, you try to look for other jobs. From that roles, I came down to analyst something roles. Like then I came to clerical roles. Okay, then I actually started looking for Tim Hortons, McDonald's. Then somebody advised me, oh, you can do Uber.
I had a family to take care of. So I decided to drive. I ended up going 17 to 18 to 19 hours a day of driving. What I have calculated is I ended up earning about $9 to $10 per hour.
It's more difficult than imagination. So we're adopting whatever is happening. Like we were okay, we're still okay, and we will always be okay, hopefully.
So these stories were so revealing, and of course I didn't drive Uber, Haroon didn't drive Uber, and many immigrants don't. But Uber kind of becomes a symbol of the underemployment and sometimes the dehumanization and then sometimes the glorification of that resilience and that struggle and that journey that many newcomers and immigrants can relate to.
Absolutely. So not every immigrant who comes to Canada will drive an Uber, but almost every immigrant who comes to Canada will have some story of underemployment. There are stats about how 30% or something around that immigrants, racialized immigrants, abandoned the field that they were working in before they came to Canada. I think 60% or so immigrants, and these are once again stats that are available out there, 60% of immigrants are kind of working in fields in which they are, working at posts which are below their experience. So Uber is, everybody's not driving gig, not in the gig economy. Everybody's not working at Tim Hortons or working as cashiers, but everybody is experiencing at their own level some level of underemployment. So we really wanted to take this lens into other forms as well. And that's kind of where we thought, because we both are writers, we both are artists. So that's where we wanted to take this lens into our new project, which is the Creative Canada project, which is essentially looking at immigrant, newcomer and refugee immigrant artists and writers, and sort of how is their experience sort of seen in a Canadian context.
I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. It was something I like. I used to save some money when I was a kid to buy book. It was like my passion. I just wanted to do that. Writing in general, not only journalism. And journalism, it was like something. I saw journalists as a heroes who can tell the truth, whatever happened, who can stand for justice, that things. And I find myself can do that. When I went to the university, I was only 16 in 2009, and at that time it was directly before the Egyptian revolution, and there was a corruption in the city, in the country, and I can feel this corruption. There were violations from the security agencies and I can feel that. I was fine. My family was fine. Our life was very good, but I cannot ignore other people's lives. This is the second and the most important turning point in my life, actually, and in my career, in my professional career, in my journalism, because at the time I went to street for two reasons: to participate in protest, as I believe in that, and also to document as a journalist. I took my small camera at the time and go to street to film. 2 years following the revolution, it was like my favorite time ever. In Egypt we have real freedom, and that reflect on everything in our life. Changed our minds, changed our thoughts. We have freedom even in thinking, and also that reflect on culture, in art, in cinema, in TV shows, in programs, in talk shows, on TVs. So we can feel it. There is freedom in everything. When the military coup happened after 2 years in 2013, many of them went to jail or simply cannot stop our work or what we are doing, because simply we cannot. It's impossible to stop. We know what is the meaning of freedom, so we cannot step back. That's it. And that's why I'm here in Canada right now, because, as you know, I've been targeted, I forced to leave. That because I cannot stay silenced. And that's it. I stopped for a while because I have other priorities to deal with. My language, my resettlement, to find a place to live, a lot of things I have to deal with. So I don't have a chance to write. I used to write in Arabic with many publications, many public publications, and they pay well for me, but pay well as an Arab person based in Egypt or based in Lebanon, which it's totally different. In Canada, I need to find an Canadian or US or English publication to publish with in English. That was another thing, because I don't have these connections. I didn't write in English, and also many publications, especially Canadians, don't care a lot about international news. I'm an expert in international news. I'm an expert in MENA region. So I also need to find that thing we talked about, the Canadian angle, or to find the local issues to write about. I was trying to understand the city, to understand the country, to find these relations. But I don't agree with that thing called Canadian angle. I think Canada is, everything has a Canadian angle. We have immigrants from everywhere who care about their countries, and also Canada is a big country which involved in everywhere in the world. So everything has a Canadian angle. I write now in English to find some place can pay well for me. So actually my audience shifted, because my main audience used to read my writings in Arabic. Now I have to write in English for financial reasons. Even my language and how I express and provide information shifted, because they are for different audience. For example, my Arabic writers, they have the basic things, to know the countries, they know the context, so I don't have to provide them with every detail in every piece. But when I write in English, unfortunately, I have to do that. In every piece, I have to provide a context, and provide readers with like the main points. I would love to consider it my home. I'm exhausted from moving from a place to another, so I have to make it my home. You know what I mean? I didn't have this feeling yet, but I'm working on it. I'm working on strengthening my connection to the land, to the people, to the city, and yeah, I would love to stay here and to feel that it's my home.
So the Qissa Festival, which is the Newcomer Refugee Literary Festival, is very much coming from that perspective, where what happens when we bring these 8 newcomer refugee writers together, and we kind of remove all parameters about them need to prove to us that they are accomplished, or we tell them what they need to do to sort of adjust in Canada. Now, what is also happening is that because there is such a big immigration kind of pathways into Canada, there's a huge support system economy around newcomers and immigrants. The settlement sector is a multi-billion-dollar industry in Canada. But a lot of times we feel that one big issue with the settlement sector is that there is a lot of telling the immigrants what they need, as opposed to, or what they need to do to kind of adjust into the system, as opposed to really meeting them where they are. So, for example, English language training or resume training, or how to write a LinkedIn post or make a LinkedIn account are some of the most kind of main training that immigrants are provided. Now, once again, you have immigrants coming with 20 years of experience who've worked at McKinsey, for example, have worked up in Dubai for 20 years, or have World Bank experiences and multiple other experiences. And those immigrants are being told how to write resumes, because that's what the problem is. And it's kind of like not addressing the problem head on, which is that the Canadian job market is kind of discriminating against Global South work experience. So we wanted to take this lens into Qissa Festival. What happens when we don't tell immigrants what they need to do to adjust into Canada, but rather just bring them together into a room and have a conversation around immigration. What does it mean to immigrate? What does it mean to kind of devalue yourself to kind of find a job? What does it mean to kind of edit and kind of cut down on your resume? So we kind of brought these 8 amazing writers for the inaugural festival. We brought these 8 amazing writers together in a room, and we just had these conversations. And the idea was that these writers will then go back and they will find inspiration from these conversations and then write something original as a response to some of the themes that have come out of some of those discussions. So through a series of workshops, then these writers developed these amazing pieces, and that kind of became the foundation of our inaugural Qissa Festival.
As a writer myself, when I first came here and I really moved to Canada so I could continue writing, very quickly I realized I couldn't. Then I stopped for a really long time. And anybody over here who's listening, who who's a creative professional in any way, know how scary it is when you think you cannot create anymore. And I really kind of grappled with that, like, will I ever be able to create? And then I realized that the difficulty I was encountering was that my audience had changed, right? Of course, Canada is a very diverse place, but the way in which audiences are imagined and the way publishers kind of look at audiences and the way a lot of the media organizations are organized, it kind of still has this very Western kind of framework. And I started to think about the issues that I write about at home, which I hoped kind of went against the grain or the dominant narrative, over here can be selectively appropriated or in unintentional ways kind of reinforce tropes and stereotypes about places like Pakistan, fundamentalism and backwardness and so forth. And I didn't want to do that. And I also very quickly realized that there are certain expectations from immigrant writers, from racialized immigrant writers, Global South writers, Muslim writers, and so forth. And when you don't want to tell those stories, there's very little space. There are, of course, some local publishing homes and other organizations that are really trying to push back and create space, but there's a long way to go, essentially. And this is something, as we started talking to other writers, they were facing as well, right? Like one of our writers asked, what if I'm from Iran, but I just want to write a horror story about something else? Like, am I allowed to do that? Are you allowed to kind of experiment freely and not have to kind of respond to the stories that are expected from you?
Dark mirror, say hello to the mirror. Show what is hidden. Bring back the lost. Bring back the lost. Say hello to the mirror. Dark mirror, wake up. Hello. Show what is hidden. Salam. Bring back the lost. Dark mirror, bring back the lost. Show what is hidden. Bring back the lost. Bring back the lost. My grandmother was a mirror reader. Whenever something was lost, she would take a small mirror from her purse. She would stare into it for a long time, and the mirror would show her where the lost thing was. Sometimes living, sometimes the dead. The mirror showed everything: the missing, the hidden, the buried. Before she died, my grandmother revealed a secret. You Talo, you are one of us, a mirror reader. This gift runs in your blood. Whenever you lose something, stand in front of the mirror, call its name. She died, and I never found her again, not even in the mirror. Years passed. I had to leave my country to survive. I had to disappear. I had to lose myself so no one could find me. But when I finally arrived somewhere safe, I realized I could no longer find myself. That day something truly vanished. Maybe my home, maybe my language, maybe myself. For the first time, I stood in front of mirror and called my own name. Say hello to mirror. I saw a woman. She had my face, my eyes, but I did not know her. I stepped back. Was she my reflection, or was I hers? I began to avoid mirror. I tried to leave without meeting that woman again. But one morning, something had changed. Something had changed. I had
become the woman in the mirror, and the woman I knew was gone. I no longer knew if I was living my own life or the life of my reflection. Somewhere between sleep and waking, between image and body, between memory and forgetting, I was lost. My reflection was a seal in Tehran.
Or maybe I was a seal in Tehran, and my reflection was here in Toronto. Which one was I?
Or maybe I was a seal in Tehran, and my reflection was here in Toronto. Which one was I? Myself or my image? Two women in two cities, or one woman lost within the city that exiled her and the city that received her. Between reality and dream, between reality and dream, image and body, between memory and forgetting, I was lost.
I'm a lost thing among my own self. I'm a lost thing among my own self. Between cities, between mirrors, between memories, between borders. I am a lost thing among my own self. I am a lost thing among my own self. Half awake, half asleep, half asleep, half awake. My voice crosses border, and the selves lost between them answer me. Hello.
Another writer who is a refugee from Lebanon talked a lot about, stories that are expected from her and what happens when, she also experiences nostalgia and longing and looking back for home.
Baba. It's been 2,341 restless days and long, long nights, and counting. Over 6 long years since I held you last. 37 new gray hairs and 12 wrinkles on my face. Petra has grown a full 42 centimeters and has had 5 haircuts. 7 baby teeth have been replaced by new ones. I don't know why, but I saved them for you. And like many pieces of her and myself, I lost them too. I ransack the house at night like a mad woman. I quietly turn things upside down and inside out. But I just can't find them. Forgive me. Petra cannot pronounce the ha in bhabbak, which is I love you in Arabic. I don't always speak to her in your tongue. Their language is easier, and I don't have the patience to translate anymore. Forgive me. I tell her about the little village high on top of that great big mountain where we are from. I tell her, but really I'm reminding myself, about the aunties that bathed her with kisses every day and the uncles who danced with her high on their shoulders. About the walks we took up that mountain and the brook I laid her in on those hot summer days. I would say, Petra, that water was so sweet, our ancestors actually named it the fountain of honey. But she's unimpressed. Petra doesn't believe any of it. Forgive me. $2,341 days I've lost. 2,341 laughs, conversations, late night coffee cup readings, walks in the snow, fights, and tears. 2,341 memories of what could and should have been lost. Forgive me. This land has aged me in ways I never thought possible. My heart feels smaller and my back is more round. I still carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. I don't recognize myself anymore, and that's not the worst part about it. What if I show up at your door one day and you're not there? بحبك بابا, سامحني.
What happens to writers who want to write about the challenges they face in Canada after arriving here? How quickly does that then turn into, well, then why don't you go back to where you came from? Why are you even here?
It is likely no one escapes one of racism's many forms. Someone claims white supremacy and entitlement to insult others of color. An employer refuses to hire a newcomer. A manager deliberately humiliates those darker than himself. The list begins with manufactured street conflicts and slurs against migrants, and sometimes ends in hate speech, incitement, and even murder. It is not only racism. Friends forced from their countries due to wars, political conflicts, and prisons that devoured their lives repeat the same refrain. Exile was cold, and the feelings were cold. They speak of a loneliness and a difficulty of integration. Many found it difficult to form romantic bonds or build new social networks. Some withdrew to live enclosed with grief memories, and a longing for home. Others kept trying to adapt to the new country, succeeding at times and failing at others. It is hard to begin a life from zero, from below zero, in a country with a different language, history, temperament, and culture from everything one has known. You start learning again like a 5-year-old child, spelling new letters, forming sentences without mistakes, learning manners and taboos according to the new society's rules, training your hand to write Latin script quickly and legibly, forgetting beloved foods and forcing yourself to accept taste your stomach may resist, expressing your feelings in a foreign tongue. And then you sleep, and you dream in your mother language and of your motherland. The dream becomes your reality. Reality becomes a daily necessity you endure until you return to your room, face your truth, and prepare to meet the dream again.
And so there are these real kind of roadblocks and limitations and expectations that folks experience, and especially when you're a refugee writer. The refugee writers that we worked with talked a lot about the label of refugee and how there's an expectation that you almost have to perform to that label. What is a refugee writer supposed to write about, right? And they can be a voyeuristic kind of gaze, a gaze, yes, of the saviorism, but then also of trauma and how trauma is supposed to look, how trauma is supposed to emerge, right? What is right and real trauma? And this is, of course, a question that in asylum applications that people are constantly running into, like which trauma will be kind of perceived as the real trauma, and how do you present that? And publishers and the world really is expecting those kind of stories sometimes as well. And so we wanted to challenge some of this in a very small way. We really started as a collective, but we knew that there are others who are kind of feeling these or experiencing these things like us, and we wanted to create a space where, like, really we entered as a question. We're not event people. We've never organized an event. We're writers, but like, what would happen if we bring all of us together in a room and we take away some of the expectations, right? We take away the expectation of what you're supposed to write, or what kind of pieces you can perform, or how you can perform them, and what our traditional literature festival is supposed to look like, and the fact, most importantly, that you're emerging. What if we take that label away? Because even the most well-intentioned literary programs and awards treat writers with 2 decades of experience as emerging writers. So what if we take that label away, right? And we see you as professionals, and now we're all here, and what do you want to respond to? So in a way then, every single artist became a co-curator, co-creator of the festival itself. Going in, we didn't really know what themes we were going to respond to, but very quickly, through the conversation, issues that kind of resonated across came about, and people went away and they felt this freedom to kind of experiment. So people wrote their first theater plays.
England traveled with us, it seems. One never felt displaced.
My husband leave with one trunk. Clothes I spin and stitch myself. Nothing warm for snow. And debt.
Debt?
My husband walk 2 days to Lahore, get paper from government, then train to Bombay, then ship to Shanghai and ship to Vancouver. Agent take money. Fare cost a lot of money. We have little land. Crop failed 2 year. Tax still same. What will woman do? Leave 4 walls of home and work for children.
And did their first stand-up comedy.
So I am a bit intense. Not in a CrossFit type of way, in a way. And I won't be discussing Hegel. Anyway, what is it? Okay. But as in, it's not a conflict. between Israel and Palestine.
And they experimented in genres, and somebody did a beautiful kind of presentation around food, bringing butter chicken actually from the grocery store and making butter chicken as a commentary on how immigrants kind of have to make themselves digestible and package themselves in these palatable ways. So it became this incredible day of immersive experiencing. We had musicians and I think one of the beauties was that, like as Haroon was saying, for so long immigrants are kind of told when they arrive of how they're supposed to fit in, and here we were changing the dynamic. So you had these newcomer refugee writers kind of on stage taking up space, deciding how they wanted to perform, writing pieces that they wanted to without any expectations, and we came together, and in the audience you had a lot of other newcomers and refugees, not necessarily writers but people who kind of related to these experiences. But then we also had people from arts councils and settlement organizations and people involved in newcomer refugee programming to really listen, to change the dynamic. Who's talking here? Who needs to be informed? And how can you take these conversations to better support the programming that you have available? So what kind of started as like just wanting to create space, hopefully the idea is that these conversations can then inform in a very small way, of course, we're a very small organization, but inform some of the programming and the systemic changes that really need to happen. So we move away from this idea of immigrants having to fit in to how do systems need to change, right? Because when I was talking with the Uber project a little while ago, one thing that we kept encountering, so most of the Uber drivers we interviewed talked about how their families back home did not know what they did, right? Because of course there's this idea in South Asia, in a lot of the global South, that you kind of go west and then things are better. So that same idea of upward mobility is internalized, right? And that's because of our histories of colonization, of course. And so once you're here, everything is supposed to be okay. And especially with the way gig economy and capitalism works, it's fragmented. So everyone is kind of experiencing these things in isolation. I mean, there's not even a taxi stand to come around and congregate and have that shared experience. You are a lone kind of driver or a delivery worker. So you're grappling with all of this, and it's very easy to kind of say, I must be doing something wrong. Right? And it's very easy to kind of feel that shame and that isolation and that sense of failure. And if only I got that resume right, or if only I, spoke in a better accent, or if only I in some way could get closer to white proximity, and then maybe I can be fine. Right? Or maybe I'm not trying hard enough, or maybe I need to take pride in my struggle. Sure, of course, as an individual, I think absolutely the resilience that the system requires is something that you need to own because you have all gone through it. But when it gets appropriated and taken up by the same system that puts you through that experience, that's when it's dangerous, right? And so you have all of these individuals kind of really struggling with this idea of what do I need to do more to fit in? And really the answer is no, the system needs to change. So when we come together and we create these spaces, the hope really is that we can start to point the problem to where it is rather than internalizing it, and start to have those conversations that maybe at least can be heard. And then slowly start to shift things.
Yeah, now one of the most kind of beautiful things that emerged in the festival, and it almost emerged as an accident and something now we want to build more deeply into, is the performance part of it. So as Anna mentioned and I mentioned before her, is that all the writers wrote something original. Now, our initial idea was that original writing would somehow inform the panel discussions and kind of the curation of the day. But somehow the writing pieces kind of worked in a way that they could all be performed. So we had stand-up comedy, we had theater, we had a journalistic piece, we had a dance performance, and we had a music presentation, a food presentation, and so on. So then performance was built into every session. Now, what it also did, so how we formatted the festival because of how it emerged. And I think we didn't do anything like deliberately, just how the kind of whole thing kind of came together because of the writers and the pieces that they were producing, is that before every panel discussion, we had a 15-minute performance of one writer's piece and then a 15-minute performance of the other writer's piece, and then we had a 30-minute panel discussion that kind of followed, that addressed some of the themes that kind of emerged from those performances. Now, this format actually worked very, very beautifully, because the idea is that a lot of these writers are kind of new in a Canadian context. Now, they're not emerging, they're not kind of like new in the art craft, but in terms of the audiences in Canada, they're new. So a lot of audience members didn't really know what these writers have written or who they are. So instead of telling them that how well accomplished they are on panel discussions, which is kind of what we wanted to do, and it really challenged the whole idea of who newcomer refugee writers are imagined to be. We wanted to challenge that, but we didn't want them to tell everybody like how accomplished they are, but rather we wanted to show them. And then these performances became a beautiful way in which we could actually show the beautiful art that these writers made. And it was just, some of the work was absolutely fantastic. In fact, all of the work was absolutely fantastic. And all of the performances were then followed by panel discussions. So what these panels did was that they showed to the audience members the kind of the depth of these artists. So it really showed them, as opposed to us telling them that these newcomer refugee writers are not always emerging artists, but rather sometimes they're very, very accomplished, and we need to talk about that. And then when we saw the level of engagement for the panel discussions just went through the roof. Also because then we had inbuilt breaks. We had a 15-minute performance, and then a 30-minute panel. So we almost had an hour-long session, but the attention was so rapt, and people who came for the first panel ended up staying for the whole panel, whole day, because that's just how the day was kind of created. Another thing deliberately what we did was that instead of like usually how literary festivals are kind of planned and organized, that sometimes you might have multiple panels at the same time, and there is a broader curation, but sometimes some sessions can look kind of disconnected. Now, in the festival that we created, I think one thing that we really wanted to build in was that there was a curation from the start to the end. So how the panels were structured is that you were meant to get the full experience as an audience member. You were encouraged to attend the first session and then stay throughout the day, and then stay till the end, because the first session is kind of talking about how do we learn how to become Canadians. Like that's what the first session was kind of all about. The second session then became about what happens when you learn how to become a Canadian. What parts of yourself do you lose? The third session was then about, okay, then how do you recover parts of yourself? And that's what the third session was all about. And the fourth session then was about what are the broader systems and structures that facilitate this whole process, that fuel this immigration pathways and force individuals to go through this journey. So it was very much like a very complete in that sense, that it talked about the whole immigrant experience from the beginning to the end, and the sessions were designed in that way, and they were not meant to be competitive, but they were meant to be complementary to each other.
Honestly, we were so taken aback by how many people wanted to show up and how many people this conversation resonated with. As I mentioned, we'd never done an event before, and so this was such a new space for all of us, and we were kind of figuring it out as we were going. We started with just being literary. We thought we'll do it online. It became in person, and then suddenly every single piece was created in a way that we could really see what it would do if it was performed. So then we had actors involved, and we had other kinds of artists involved, and all of them mostly newcomer, immigrant, refugee. And so this day became more than what we had imagined. And some of the feedback we kind of got from people who came, just really, it meant so much. We had somebody say, I've been in Toronto since 30 years, but today I felt like I had arrived. People said they felt seen, and it was magical, really, to be able to be in this space and experience it ourselves. And so it gave us the inspiration, but also the confidence, I think, that there is a space, and if you push, people want these conversations. So we are really, really excited that we're going to be bringing the festival back next year in April. We hope to make it bigger. It was a one-day event. We might make it, a day and a half, a 2-day event. We're going to be working again, I think, with 8 writers. There's something really beautiful about working with a smaller number of writers, so we can have these intimate conversations and then create this work and then bring in other artists, musicians, and actors to be able to perform those pieces. Unlike other festivals at this point, I cannot say what the theme is going to be. And I think that's the beauty of it, because it's when we kind of come together during these workshops that we do prior to the actual festival, we together decide what is resonating, what do we want to respond to, how do we want to respond to it. And then the folks go away, and somehow the pieces tend to speak to one another. So that's the goal this year. We already have 3 of our writers confirmed, and we are in the process of kind of identifying other writers, and then we begin. It's really showtime, and so it's for the longest time, after I moved here, I really wondered what will happen to my creative practice. What will I do as a writer? What do I do with my oral history practice? Right? I worry about being here and writing about the things I wrote about, especially because my work was so rooted in field work, right? And I can still go and do that field work, and I do, right? But I'm also really aware that sitting here changes something and shifts something. And I want to continue writing about the stories, but I also want to be aware of the limitations of being in the diaspora and how a diaspora can also have a gaze on home. Right? And so I wondered, do I stop practicing, and what do I do? What are the stories that are important to tell? And I think through Qissa and through the other writers we work with, I think we're trying to figure out, well, what are some stories that feel relevant, that really resonate, where you feel being in the city. I think one of the things I really think about is how so much of our writing, so much of our art, so much of our work is shaped by the social political climate. And my work was entirely shaped by the South Asian context in which I was writing, right? Now I'm out of that context. I can still try to reach, I can still try to do that work, and I always will, right? But I'm in this new context, and there's something about the everyday conversations, the sounds that you hear, the smells that you engage with, the conversations that you engage with, that start to, shape you and shape how you think. And how do you respond to those as an artist? And so through Qissa, I feel like finally, I have a sense of what I want to do, and I am just so thrilled that other writers we're working with are also feeling like it's creating space for them to do the kind of writing and the kind of work that they want to do, and whether that's about a home, whether that's about nostalgia, whether that's about family, whether that's about navigating systems over here, but it's been a difficult journey, but to be able to find a semblance of that really means everything.
And I think what we've also noticed, just to conclude this whole discussion, is that even though this work means so much to us, and we have kind of rediscovered our artistic practice in a new social context, I think, especially speaking with people who are part of the festival, who are part of the work that we do, and what this work means to them. So I think there's a very strong sense of community that has developed around Qissa. There are some very, very strong supporters that we have. Everybody who we've worked with wants to work with us again, not because of just who we are, but also because of what this work means to them. So there is a sense of ownership, which is kind of how we want to build our work in the future as well, and kind of continue that very strong community spirit. Because we think of our work as political, we think of our work as movement, as campaigning, and then I think so there's a very strong sense of community that is developing around our work, and we're very proud of all the work that all of our volunteers, all of our writers, and the organization has been able to do since the past couple of years.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you for listening to this conversation. And thank you again for Sabine and Namrata for organizing this. I think this is one of the most unique festivals, honestly, that I've had the opportunity to speak at, and I've been engaged for a little while now, and it means so much that you are pushing against the dominant forms of festivals as well, and allowing and enabling conversations that usually don't find a lot of space. So thank you for having us, and thank you for giving us this platform to share a little bit about the work that we're doing here.
Thank you so much.